Hi, everybody, and welcome one more time to El Camino People, the podcast. Sorry for the weird image. My GoPro is doing weird things. I think it's almost Black Friday, so I guess it's time to get a new camera. But as the Camino gets closed down, things are getting back to normal. Winter is coming. We finally got the first snow over the Pyrenees. So what a better thing to do that listen to, the Camino stories, the Camino, the people that walk the Camino, the people that made the Camino what it is. And today we have a dear friend and pilgrim. Hi, Peter. How are you doing? Thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me, and happy to have a Camino conversation with you. As well as with, I always have. I'm happy to have a conversation about the Camino. So
It is one of the things that I don't know if it happens to you. With me is like every time I meet someone new, for when we never met with Peter. This is the first time we've been chatting in a while, but this is the first time we see each other. But it's something that when you see someone that has gone through the Camino, that is all connected to the Camino, it feels like it's so easy to talk because the Camino, it's something that just flows. It's that we don't need any stars and we don't need anything. Like you go there, like he knows what I'm talking about. I know what you're talking about. I'm like, let's just chat.
completely recognize that, and it reminds me of a phone call I got from my son when he was on his first Camino, and he said, "You know what I'm talking about? That you have done it before," and that's exactly what it is.
As it is what we always say. If you haven't walked it, there's no way I can explain it to you. But if you already walk it, I'm like, we already know what it is, both of us. So it is amazing. It's so funny that your son, find out that and tells you that when he was walking the Camino.
Yeah.
That is incredible. So, we always start with the 1 minute questionnaire. We have here the list of questions. It's about 40 questions. So you have 1 minute to answer as many as you can. And while you do that, I will go and reset my camera. So are you ready for the 1 minute questionnaire?
Probably not for all 40, but let's try.
Let's see where it goes. Okay, let's start now. Your first Camino.
2013.
How many Caminos?
Depends how you count, between 8 and 10.
Favorite city?
Santiago.
A favorite hostel?
Casa Fernandez.
One color?
Blue.
A memory?
Walking up to Santiago de Compostela, the first Camino, and saying goodbye to my mother
Happy moment?
every time I'm on the Camino.
A smell?
Eucalyptus.
Canteen or camelback?
Uh, Both.
Short pants or long pants?
Short pants.
Coffee, solo or con leche?
Café Solo.
The omelette, with or without onions?
Without onions.
Okay, we'll do that. One plant,
Plant. Um,
Fisterra or Muxia?
Moxia.
Okay, I think not onions. Really, are you one of those?
Yes, I'm one of those.
It's one of these because lately it's been one of the biggest discussions in the Camino since a famous chef in Spain here was saying that the omelette with the onions didn't make any sense, and suddenly someone is there was this conversation on Facebook, and it's so funny. But I'm like, yeah, there's people with onions, there's people with onions, and they all live together in the Camino happily. So tell me, Peter, you are from the Netherlands. How did you find out about the Camino de Santiago?
That's a good question. And I don't exactly remember when it was, but I know that I read an article about, I believe, a South American entrepreneur. And she walked the Camino to Spain, and she had a motto that's where she said, if I can walk solo across Spain, and then I can do everything. So that was the first time that I heard about the Camino. It must have been somewhere 2001, 2002, that period, and it started to fascinate me. So why are people walking so that distance along northern Spain to arrive in a city that where supposedly the remains of Saint James are buried? And so I said, one day I will do it, and that one day I will do it. Stayed on for 10 years or so. And then in 2012, we met a lady who walked all the way from the Netherlands to Santiago. And I was really hyped up again. And I said, well, let's schedule it. And my wife said, so when can you do it? I said, well, maybe next year in April, May, I can do it. I can make 5 weeks available. Um, and then she started to talk to everybody she met. And she said, well, next year, Peter will walk the Camino. So there was no way back for me. I had to walk the Camino and had complete support from the home front. So that's more
That's
or less
amazing.
this.
I never heard that quote like if I can walk along the Camino, there is nothing else that can stop me. It's kind of like true. I'm like once you walk the Camino, you realize like sometimes it's just putting one step forward, and once you start going, there's no way to stop you.
That's true. And
Um,
it's somewhat addictive, as you have seen my list of Caminos.
That's something that everybody that walks the Camino, that's what I tell everyone. Your first Camino, you may not know it, but when you arrive to Santiago, you may not know it. When you leave Murcia, you may not know it, but suddenly it's going to hit you. Some people get hit along the Camino. Some people is when they arrive to Santiago. Some people they are already planning the next Camino on the day two of the first Camino. So, but it's something that the ones that we are here, and usually people that I interview, they get it quite how it feels, and that's why you always have that Camino in the back of your head, and again the camera doing weird things. But so then you always been in the corporate life, and you discovered about this thing, the Camino de Santiago. Was that something that people in Netherlands talk about? Was it something big in 2001? Because that was the best, was the beginning of the years of the beginning of the big Camino. I'm like, today
Yeah.
we remember the first time that the Pope arrived in Santiago, and that was when the numbers start growing faster and faster. But it wasn't until the early 2000s when people start, that kind of like movement towards the Camino de Santiago started.
Well, not many people, especially in the corporate world, were talking about it. I think it has changed over the last more over the last 10 years than over the last 20 years.
Hmm.
But maybe you know how it goes when you walk the Camino yourself. You suddenly meet all kind of people who have walked the Camino or cycled the
Hmm.
Camino, and so maybe I'm not objective there because beforehand I didn't walk it myself, so I was not immediately talking about it. Now I walked between 8 and 10 times on the Camino. I said it depends on how you count it, and I use it in my work. So I provide the comparison between setting a journey like the Camino and creating alliances where that's my work. And
Hmm.
so in both cases, you set off with a goal, and it might be reaching Santiago. And the moment you reach that goal, it will look different than you think that it would look when you started with it. It's about preparation. It's about doing it. It's about being careful with your steps. So all those comparisons that I use in my work, that allows me to talk a lot about the Camino. And then always in the break of trainings, people come to me and say, "Hey, tell me more about the Camino."
And since you discovered this Camino this late in 2001 till 2010, 2011, then suddenly it's late, did the Camino resonate in your head, or did you watch the movie The Way, or was something that was totally, just stuck in the back of your head and never really came out as an option?
I read a couple of books about the Camino. I actually read every book that I can lay my hand on when it is about the Camino. And of course, I saw The Way. I think I saw The Way came out in 2012 or 2013, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
And so I've seen it once or twice before I walked the Camino, and I think 3 times more after that. And I believe,
Sorry, I lost you for a second. I think we are back. Yeah.
yes, we're back. So I said I saw it once or twice before the Camino, and then 3 times more after I walked the first time the Camino, which was quite interesting because I felt that they made a good representation of what can happen at the Camino. But I
Hmm.
felt also that the scenes were not completely in order of the way I walked
No.
Frances.
Totally. And that's one of the things that you realize after watching the movie. I'm walking the game. I'm like, the movie's great, but it has some glitches here that it seems like they didn't walk the Camino the way they say it. But again, it is a movie and it's great. And I think it's just amazing how it pushes people, and encourage people to go and walk the Camino.
Yeah.
So you decided the Camino, you suddenly this, and for people, one of the things that we always discuss is how you take a whole month off of your work. I'm like, that's something for most people all over the world, it's almost impossible. So how and when did you decide, this is the time I'm going to walk, and there's no way anything is holding me back?
Well, it was in September 2012 when we decided that I would walk it in April 2013. So I had some time to prepare. I was already an independent coach and trainer at that time, and I had a
Hmm.
virtual assistant that was working for me. So I planned it all out, also in business perspective, and made sure that she was reading my email, so that I was really disconnected from the day-to-day business. Um, Later on, that was the first Camino, which took me 5 weeks. to walk from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Muxia.
Hmm.
Uh, the later Caminos were always shorter in time, and I tried to stay up to date with the business in the evening hours,
Hmm.
which is a little bit juggling. Sometimes it works better than other times. I remember having a coaching call with a client on the slopes towards Osobrero, which was quite different and sometimes a little bit difficult. But on the other hand, that's a coaching call I will never forget.
Totally. And probably, that one of the questions that I always ask you first Camino, why the Camino Frances?
Yeah, why not? It was the Camino at that time in my mind. Um,
And it still is, no? I think the thing that surprised me the most is like the people that decided, to do another Camino the first time. I met people that did the first one is the Portuguese or the North. I'm like, how did you ended up, as we all, I'm like, for me, my first one was always the Camino Frances, the same as you, and starting in Saint-Jean and finishing in Muxia. But some people, I'm like, how did you manage? But, mostly all of the people is like us. Camino Frances, not the common one, the Camino, the only one that is part of the UNESCO, and the first one that was the big one.
yeah, the later
And
Camino
we're,
also depends a little bit on the time that I have available. So I did
yeah.
in 2018, for instance, I had only a week. I did Muxia, Santiago, Muxia, Finisterre, Santiago. So the
That's
triangle.
amazing. The whole loop.
Yeah,
And one of the things that come in, as you were saying, you work in creating alliances. So probably you have a really, time and a schedule and planning things and setting goals and setting, steps. On your first Camino, were you one of those super planners or were you one of the, no, this is the first time I have a starting point, I have a goal, and I don't know where it's going to take me. Whatever happens, happens. Or did you plan step by stage?
no, I did not plan stage by stage. I planned the first night, and I knew I would plan to where I would stay the second night. And then every evening I look. So what will I do next tomorrow? What's my aim for tomorrow? And sometimes it works out that way, and sometimes I think, well, this is enough. I stop. And I had one time that I had a terrible snorer in the room, and I heard him over say that he was staying in that city, and I said, I will do another 6K.
Sometimes walking 6 extra K is worth a night good sleeping, no?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how was the first time? You arrived to San Jan. This is the first time. I don't know. Are you a hiker? You've been hiking all your life, or was this something totally new for you?
It was totally new for me. I considered
So,
doing it by bicycle or by foot. And I said,
uh-huh.
well, on the bicycle I will probably go too fast, so I will miss a lot of things. So
Hmm.
on foot is my choice. I trained for it. That was the only Camino I trained for. I did, I think, 250K as a preparation in day-to-day stages, also with backpack, which
Hmm.
already led to nice conversations along the road where people say, "Hey, are you walking the Camino?" Because I already had my shell on the backpack.
So you will be walking in your hometown with the backpack, with the cell, with the full of things just to get ready for the Camino.
Yes,
That's so funny. I'm like, I
well,
think,
that's 10 years ago. I probably would not do it again because now I know about the backpack. But
and what were people saying? Because one of the things a lot of, people, I'm like, even some people worldwide, I'm like, they still don't know about the Camino. Even, a lot of people come from Germany, the Netherlands, but still kind of like smaller compared to other countries like Italy or France that they have a huge amount of pilgrims. Where people totally is like, oh, that's the Camino de Santiago, or do you have a Camino de Santiago close by in your house?
well, we have other long distance walks close by our house, but not the Camino Santiago. And
Hmm.
we do have routes in the Netherlands. I believe we have three routes in the Netherlands that merge into Belgium and then on to France. Um, but they are not as well known as the Camino in Spain. So I sometimes have indeed people who said to me, well, why don't you walk the Peter Pad, which is one of the long distance walks in the Netherlands? And it feels to me, I have never done it. It feels to me different than the Camino. And maybe I'm completely wrong there because I've never done it, but the idea of meeting international people in northern Spain and walk together and still have the same language, the same attitude, and well, that's in my perspective, my expectation, completely different than doing a long distance walk in the Netherlands.
And I guess that's the biggest question and one that, I haven't been able to find the answer to it. Why the Camino has become so popular, why the Camino is so different, why the Camino is so magic. I mean, there's so many trails all over the world. There's long distance trails that are much more beautiful in terms of nature, in terms of culture or whatever. But why the Camino has become so popular? I'm like, there's a lot of little things that add up, no? But why is it still something so growing and growing? No matter what people say that the Camino is going to be killed by himself, I believe the Camino is going to be there forever and ever, and we'll have up and downs. But why is with the Camino?
That's a great question, and I don't have the answer.
So
Because
let's go. You start your first day. You arrive to Saint Jan. You say you're not a hiker. How did you feel on the arrival day?
I felt great. I was staying in Le Chemin, I believe it was called. It
Hmm.
was back then one of the albergues in Saint-Jean that was run by a Dutch couple,
Uh-huh.
and so I had the reservation there, and I was early, so I had some time left over, and I did some walk around in Saint-Jean to explore Saint-Jean and see what the city was all about. And then we had communal dinner in the on the evening, and then I spoke to the hospitalero and said, "Well, I have a lot of things in my backpack. Will you have a look at it?" So we ditched some spare shoes because he said you don't need spare
Oh,
shoes.
no.
No, so that saved me some kilos. And I learned over time that what you leave home is best the best choice.
And I guess that's one of the things that at least you learn in a proper day, and you ask right on the first day, because a lot of people they figure it out by themselves when they're hiking over St. John, when they go to the tube, and they're like, okay, maybe I can leave this. And one of the things that I see a lot in Pamplona is a lot of people going to the post office and sending home boxes of clothing, shoes, and extra gear. And even I myself, I always say tell the same story. I'm like, when I arrive at my house in Pamplona, I sleep in my bed. I'm like, why not? And I left a lot of
It's
things in
fair.
my house. But even I walk all the Camino with a jet boil, a cooker, and some pasta, dehydrated pasta that I cook in Finisterre because I was so knucklehead that I'm going to carry this pasta all the way across Spain. And sometimes that's the only way to learn.
Yeah, I totally agree. So when I walked in 2013, I had I believe 11 kilos without water on my back. Nowadays,
Mhm.
this summer I had 6 kilos without water. So,
And that's one thing that, a lot of people, they focus on the 10%. No, that's that rule that is going all over forums, internet, Facebook. I'm like, again, your first Camino, you're going to go with more things just in case
yeah,
you're going to carry, because you don't know the water, you know the places, you need more things. Also, your gear is usually more heavy than when you start loading it because you start improving your gear. You buy better and more technique, more high quality
yeah,
gear. Your
more
backpack, you
lightweight.
focus more and you spend more money. But in the first Camino, a backpack that is 10 kilos is totally normal. So stop trying to get a 6 kilos backpack. Your first Camino, 10 kilos, will go through that. I think my first Camino, mine was 15 kilos, but I carry food, gear. I don't know. It was just, it is what it is.
Completely recognizable. Yeah.
And how was the first stage? Were you on the first day, you were planning on going all the way to Roncesvalles? Were you planning on going and stopping in the middle way, or you have no plans? It was like whatever the Camino.
Well, I was planning to go all the way to Roncesvalles, and when I remember that was what was it, 27K, I believe, all the way
Mhm.
over the Pyrenees. We had a great day, so not that much wind, dry, sunny, um, which was a great experience to walk over the Pyrenees. It was, yeah, as I said, great. It was not hard or not something like
It
that.
wasn't hard for you. It wasn't one of those because people, when you always start doing the big research that everyone does, it's like, oh, the first stage, San Jean to Roncesvalles, the killer, the pilgrim, blah, blah, blah.
Well, I was well trained back then. And this summer I did first a week on the Del Norte, and I thought, why am I doing this? And I was going up and
Wow.
down in the heat wave, and I said, this is not healthy. In 2013, I was well trained, so it was easy to go over the Pyrenees. That's what I learned this summer. Better do some home walking, a little bit more home walking to be trained again next time.
And that's one of the things that I totally agree with you. Training is not needed for the Camino. And sometimes when you go and train, you learn a lot of things about yourself that you don't learn if you're going to train. But if you can always be a little trained, that will be, safer for you, and you will enjoy all the things that sometimes they make you miserable. And also Del Norte, the first week in Del Norte is a killer no matter what. but it's so beauty. I will talk about the north later. So you start in your Camino Frances. You went by yourself.
Yes, I was by myself. I met three other pilgrims, a lot of other pilgrims, but three others that on the way up, and we started to walk together for the first 4 or 5 days on the Frances.
And how was coming, from a so, the corporate life, suddenly you're freelancer, you left everything home, probably the first time in your life that you have such a long time with no needed. How was the feeling? Was it something that, like pushed you? Was something that relieved you? How did it feel when you finally, arrived to Roncesvalles? Like, okay, I'm a pilgrim. I don't think, it was something that you didn't even think about.
I don't think that in the beginning I had that feeling like I'm a pilgrim. I have that feeling nowadays more than back then. You still there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just resetting the camera. Sorry, I'm trying to. And how was I arriving to Roncesvalles? A lot of the people, one of the things that we always talk is the Camino family. Were you okay? Yeah, you see, now you can
Yes,
see
there
me
you
better.
are.
Were you with that group of friends for your whole Camino, or were you doing your Camino most by yourself and finding the people here and there?
No, so I walked the first 4 or 5 days with what was back then my Camino family, but what we did was really walk together. So we started together, we stayed together, we walked together, which was a little bit, which was good, but also a little bit too close knit. So after 4 or 5 days, I said in Logroño, I said, well, I will continue myself from here on. And so we met a couple of times along the road. And quite
Hmm.
interesting, I was faster than they were. So when I returned from Muxia into Santiago, I was at the pilgrim's office, and suddenly I saw two of them walking by the pilgrim office. They just arrived. So we had
Oh, so
lunch together. And
you were
when I
fast.
left Santiago and on the plane, I met the other guy that he suddenly said, I was in the airport, and suddenly somebody said, "Hey, Peter." And so that was the other guy that I met on the first day. So we all met again in Santiago.
It's amazing. Those days, that's one of the things that I always recommend people. Stay a couple of days in Santiago just to see people that you walk with
Yes.
arrive and get together is one of those things that you always remember. And suddenly you get your Camino and you arrive. And how was the arrival into Santiago? Was that, a lot of people sometimes when they talk about the Camino Santiago, the arrival is the day when suddenly, the skies opens and there is a light and you get enlightened and you see finally the light at the end of the tunnel. It's like, yes, now I know my purpose in life. Were you something like that, or how was
No,
your arrival?
I arrived and I thought, is this it? Is this really it? And so it was amazing to be there and see the cathedral and then be at the square and watch other people. But I really felt that arriving in Muxia, also not in Finisterre, because I did Santiago Finisterre, Finisterre Muxia. Arriving in Muxia, I said, well, this is it. Now I have really completed my Camino.
You know what is funny? That for me was totally the same. I arrived in Santiago. It was great. I'm like, it was amazing. I arrived really early in the morning. But for me, Murcia was the place. When I was sitting at the Virgen de la Barca watching the sunset, that was the day when I'm like, this is
Yeah,
my Camino. This is where now everything ends and everything begins.
same here.
Yeah. And then suddenly we're talking at the beginning how, you get hooked to the Camino. When was this, the Camino fever hit you? Were you already planning your next Camino in Santiago, in Fisterra, or in Muxia? Or when you got back home?
Well, it took me a couple of years to plan my next Camino, actually, to be
Okay, so it
honest.
wasn't something like a lot of people like right away was that's not this is
So
good. It was once in a lifetime.
I thought I will do it again, but I don't know when. And then my son did it in 2016, so 3 years after that I walked. And he
Hmm.
called me at a certain moment in time, and like I mentioned, he said, "Well, Dad, you know what I'm talking about." And in that conversation, I said, "What if I clear my schedule for a week and join you?" And he said, "Yes." So I joined him from Astorga to Sarria, and then took the train home first to Santiago, and then fly back home to Amsterdam. And that was the moment then when I came home that my wife said, "Well, why don't we do it together in September?" So I walked from the Frances from Astorga to Santiago together with my wife in 3 weeks.
Hmm.
And that was the moment that really hooked me, those two Caminos that were. So I came back in 2017, 18, 19, had planned for 2020 and 21, but of course, life came in between.
Hmm.
And so this summer I did a week on the Del Norte and 2 weeks on the Primitivo together with my son. and 2 weeks on the Portuguese together with my wife again.
It's amazing. And was like the Camino, your son's Camino, something that you motivated, or was something that was just motivated by friends, or something that himself he just decided, it's time for me to walk.
Somehow I spread the Camino virus in my family. So all of my kids said, "Well, we will do it someday." And my son was the quickest with really doing it. So he did 2016, 2017. He did this year 2 Caminos, and he's really hooked onto the Camino now.
So also one of the ones that we'll have to interview one day and see the other side of the coin.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
how was walking the Camino with your son? Because that's one of the things that a lot of people, ask me, like, is the Camino, when you talk about the Camino, sometimes it's like, okay, the perfect Camino is the full Camino Frances by yourself with plenty of time, enjoying the time. But also, I believe that each Camino gives you something different. The Camino with your wife is amazing. The Camino with your partner, the Camino with your, dad. How was walking a week with your son?
It was amazing in the sense that we certainly had more time to discuss things in life that we will not discuss or not easily discuss when back home. He was already back then, he was a student. He was living in Amsterdam. We were living close to Amsterdam. So as a student, you do not always visit your parents. Sometimes there are some weeks in between, let's put it mildly. So, and when he comes home, we have an hour or 2 hours to talk about things we want to discuss. But now we had 7 full days to talk about anything that came up in our mind. And we gave each other a lot of freedom. So I remember one rainy day where he said, "Dad, it's raining. I put in my earplugs and listen to music and walk alone today." I said, "Fine, I'll see you when we stop." And that's the same how we did the Primitivo. So we walked together and we walked alone. And
And that's
that's
one
for
thing
me.
that a lot of people ask me. I'm like, and how can you walk the Camino with someone and walk by yourself? I'm like, sometimes that's the kind of rules that they need. That when you walk the Camino, you don't even need to talk about it. It's like some mornings you just walk and go, and I'm like, this is just totally an agreement. And when you arrive to the place, that's when you have your social time. Sometimes I'm like, even with my Camino family, probably happen the same to you. You will start in the morning, you will start walking, but some people will go by themselves. I'm like, and that's, I think, the beauty of the Camino, when walking with someone, as close as your son, that they can get so many interactions. But you can have your own Camino, and he can have your own Camino. And probably if I ask him, he will answer the same questions. Totally, the view of the Camino can be totally different from one to another.
Yeah. And it allows what we discussed a lot of things that we would not discuss at home. So we spoke about life, about study, about work, about buying a house or not, all those kind of things that you will not have really have time to go in depth in the few hours at home.
Probably the Camino opens as you open with other people. Probably that chat opens easier when you are in the Camino and you're with other people around you. Doesn't is just your son. He's also a pilgrim, no?
He's definitely pilgrim, and we walked this in the Primitivo. We last week, I think the last week we walked with the Camino family of 8 people. So we met each other on the road and we walked together. We walked alone. We had dinner together. We had a WhatsApp group where we stayed in touch. We still actually have that WhatsApp group. So that was amazing Camino family as well.
That's amazing. So then your son come walk the Camino. Suddenly you decided to walk with your wife. How was the experience with your wife? Because that's also another one. I'm like, a lot of people going to the Camino with your wife. I hear it all. I'm like, the strangest one that I ever heard was someone that went to the Camino with his ex-wife for a long years, and they decided to go together. I'm like, but anything can happen the Camino. So how was it starting in Astorga and finishing in Santiago?
That was a great experience. And what we found out is that we have, of course, a different pace of walking. So I needed
Hmm.
to adjust and walk a little bit slower. But like my son, I can walk long distances, so I can do 25 to 35 kilometers or sometimes even more. My
Yeah.
wife turned out she has some kind of built-in clock that she doesn't
Hmm.
know the distance, but at a certain moment in time she says, "Well, I've had enough for today." And then I look at my iPhone because I keep track of our distance, and it's around 15 kilometers. That's her distance, and it's a perfect built-in GPS or distance measurement that she has. And so we found our way, and we did it again. This was Portuguese. We found our mutual way of doing the Camino, where she sometimes picks up a taxi along the road and goes to our place where we stay, and then I'll continue walking. And with what's also different with my wife is that She likes a little bit more luxury than the albergues, so we have private
Hmm.
hostels together. So that's a different model than with my son or alone. Then I'll stay in the albergues.
That's, probably what a lot of people they sometimes, we talk about the way, what is a pilgrim, what is the Camino, how it's supposed to be, and I always say that, there's only one way and it's your way. And if you choose to go hotels, if you go to choose a taxi, if that's the only way that you and your wife can have each one your own Camino, I'm like, why not? I'm like, what is the problem in this? A lot of people seem today that, there's all this new concept of, oh, there's only these real pilgrims. And to be a pilgrim, you need to follow this, and this. But for your experience, I'm like, probably the Camino by yourself was one kind of Camino. The Camino with your son was another one. And then here we have the Camino with your wife that you're looking for totally different things. And
Yeah,
each one probably show you a different aspect of the Camino and give you something different. So what would you say, to people that is, sometimes just saying, oh, the Camino is just to go to albergues or whatever. What is your opinion on all these three Caminos or
I,
styles?
I agree with you that everybody has their own way of doing the Camino, and we should give each other room to do our own Camino. Sometimes we talk about the Peregrinos that are there in their own way of the Camino, and I don't have problems with them unless they stop at the middle of a bridge and ask me to turn back because they want to take a picture. And they say, "Hey, come on, we're hiking the Camino. Let me continue." Those are the difficult moments with the different kind of Caminos. But on the other hand, I think everybody has their own way of doing the Camino. We should give each other the room to do our Camino.
I agree. I think that the only problem for me is the music. When people go with speakers, loud speakers, that's the only thing, that I cannot deal
Yeah, I
with.
recognize that.
Any other than that, I don't care. If you are playing with a guitar, if you're singing, if it's a big group, I'm like, I will speed up and pass you. If you go to a great hotel, that's amazing. Come have some beers with us. But as you were saying, it's your own Camino and you are the only one that can walk it. One of the things that I always ask the people, and is how did the first Camino change it? The Peter that started in Saint Jean to the Peter that finished in Mexia. What changed in you?
Well, it took some time to let it sink in and to realize that I changed. And I think what I learned, especially, was to let go more and let things
Hmm.
develop as they were supposed to develop and not try to control them, which is still difficult. But as we say in the Camino will provide, so things will come out in the right way as they were intended to. Or if you need help, the help will be there suddenly. So the universe will provide, or the Camino will provide it. That's what I had to learn and took forward in my try to take forward in my daily life.
Hmm. And I love, reading on your website, I read one of your biggest challenge, in business and, for freelancers like us, I think it's the biggest challenge, sometimes how do you manage the time to let things go, your business, you need you to talk with your clients, you need to do your marketing. But while you were in the Camino, like in your Camino, you say you let everything go. And I know that when I talk with people, CEOs or CFOs or people that's on the high end of the corporate scale, for them it's like so hard to give them some stuff to go into the Camino. So how was when you walked your first Camino and you let everything go? Was that something easy? Was that something that right now you will do differently? Or how do you think that people that is, maybe sometimes wondering like, how can I leave everything behind and go and do this for myself?
It was not easy, but I still walking, going up to the coming up to the first Camino. I was still in the control mode, so I planned it all together with my virtual assistant. So I felt that everything was under control, and it was under control. I think I only had one or two times a text message from her where she needed my help in 5 weeks. So that was
Wow,
pretty okay.
that's pretty good.
And planning it out made it easy, relatively easy.
And I guess that's the thing when you have a lot of things, there's no problem in planning, there's no problem in staging, there's no problem making a plan because sometimes plans that's what they're for. And we're talking at the beginning, you were saying that, as you get going into the Camino and you get hooked, and I'm totally like that, like you, I'm like, you don't need to go into Santiago. Sometimes you plan a 1 week Camino, you plan a 2 weeks Camino, and it can be all over. It doesn't have to be, just at the end of Galicia. And one of the things that sometimes people say to me, I'm like, how can you go to the Camino with a laptop and work in the afternoon? I'm like, that's my life. When I'm a freelancer, there's something, you can have the greatness of both sides of walking and being in the Camino and playing, and also in the afternoon for a little bit and this is my choice. I decide to when to work. I decide how and how long I want to work. So how do you manage your work inside when you are on the Camino, and how do you see this mix of the two worlds that sometimes people see that they cannot co-live together?
At the moment, I try to live my life from my phone when I'm on the Camino. So in the beginning, I took an iPad to stay in touch, uh,
Hmm.
to be able to do everything that I need to do. Nowadays, I can do almost everything from my phone, and otherwise, I'll send a message to the requester where I say, "Well, hey, I will come back to you next week or the week after next." It also it might help that the past, let me see, the past 6 Caminos or so I did in the summer, which is not the preferred time, but from a
Hmm.
planning perspective, it was the preferred time
Yeah.
because in the summer almost all of Europe is on vacation.
Yes.
So everybody understands that you are out for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, we're the same here in Spain from July 1st, at least in Navarra, the running of the bull. So July and August are no business time. Companies work, but they go on a much slower mode. So it's so much easier. So one of the things that I think, the Camino, and we see it, sometimes people see it as a touristic thing, some people see it as a religious thing, but I think that has a lot of much to offer, and I think has a lot to offer you know, to the work of the big companies to get the people here. What do you see the Camino can be, how can be used for all these corporations or people that is in the business life?
I think something like the Camino can still be very helpful to work on relationships within business, whether that is team building or building alliances between companies. The challenge is that many companies are not prepared to take the time out to take
Hmm.
at least a week to walk at least a week. So you could do, and then especially when they're from abroad, they need to travel to Spain. So that adds to the week. And
Hmm.
so many companies are not prepared to do that. So from that perspective, I tried it in the past, and I know that you have part of your business is Camino related. I
Hmm.
tried it in the past to bring people with me to Spain and
That
then walk the Camino, but that was quite a difficult model. So I adjusted my
hmm.
model where I bring the Camino basically into my work
Into
on
your
the
work.
into the client's location, and I tell them about the comparison between Camino alliances, business, and I use a lot of photos from the Camino, and I always have a story about it. So there's one story, one photo where a Spanish guy is standing in a river and he's singing, and two Italian ladies are standing on the bridge and they are singing the same song together. So it's an international song. I don't know what song it was, but it was both of them knew it and they sang it together. So I said, I always tell with that picture, well, this is a collaboration. This is an alliance
Hmm.
between Spain and Italy here on the Camino. And then on the outer edge of the picture, there is a guy just watching. And I always say, well, like with real alliances, there is always an innocent bystander doing nothing. So those kind of ways I bring the Camino into my work and make it easy to for people to understand the Camino, but also make it easy for them to see comparison between business and Camino.
Mhm. And I guess that's also the beauty of the Camino. No, you have all these people. There are companies that go into the Camino and suddenly they became one, only ones. With they have to collaborate and do things together. In the old days, you will go. Someone will be in charge of doing the laundry, or someone will be cooking because he's Italian. He's the perfect pasta cooker, or someone will know the language and will be the translator. But it's fun how all in the Camino you see all these different people, no, that get together as one and work together as a one thing entity that opens, close, gets different things. So I think a lot of companies may have to, go to the Camino and learn about it.
Absolutely, I totally agree.
And you walk the Camino Frances first by yourself, then with your wife, then Camino Portuguese, Camino del Norte, Primitivo. What is your favorite Camino so far?
The best and the worst is the Primitivo. Um,
Why?
why? Yeah, why? I would expect that question already. It's the most beautiful Camino I've walked so far. It's the toughest one as well. And I remember walking up to the Hospitales one day
The
together with
famous
my
hospitales.
the famous Hospitales together with my son on a very foggy day. So we were walking up, and we couldn't see the how far the distance was that we had to climb. And somewhere, probably halfway, I don't know, because I couldn't see it. I said to my son, "I will never walk this Camino again." And he said, "Are you serious?" "Yeah, I'm serious. This is too hard for me." And then one day later, I said to him, "I will do it again next year. It's the most beautiful Camino I have ever done."
But I guess that's the beauty of the Camino. Some days you are, and it's like life, a lot of times right now, the social media and everything, they just show the beautiful side of life. And I guess with the Camino, that's the same. Some days the Camino is crappy and you feel horrible and you're wet and it's just no pretty the way you're walking. But suddenly after that, the feeling is so amazing. You're like, I want to do it again.
Yes, absolutely.
So the Camino de Primitivo, and are you planning have you walked anything in your hometowns from there, or still the Camino, the thing that calls you and the things that once again and again and again, like, no, I need to go to Spain and walk a different Camino.
I like to do in the weekends long distance walks, and well, what is long distance? But the walks like 25 to 30 kilometers in the Netherlands.
Hmm.
Um, but then life comes in between, so every now and then, so other things need to be done in the weekends.
Yeah.
When it comes to a Camino, I really plan to do another Camino in Spain and not anywhere else.
And
Um,
which one will be your next? Well, the big one. If you have right now a whole month off, which one will be the Camino you will walk?
if it's a whole month, I will walk
Yeah,
the Via La Plata.
Via de Plata. I'm with you in that one.
If it's 3 months, I will walk from my front door to Santiago.
You already have it measured.
Well, I know it's some people did it, and so it's more or less
Yeah,
3 months.
3 months, not bad. Yeah, that for me that will be the Rome to Santiago. It's about 3 months also, and I would love to do it one day, but one day eventually.
Yeah.
One of the
So
questions that I always ask at the end to people is like, who, if they can choose, they will walk the Camino with. But in your case, because you do collaborate work, you work with companies. If you can choose two big companies and you're trying to, imagine they are have to merge, which companies will you take into the Camino? Which CEOs will you love to take in the Camino?
that's a great question. The first ones that come to mind is probably some cultural differences in companies like Nissan and Renault, and they have an
Hmm.
alliance together, but they have gone through some turbulent times. And bring those CEOs for a couple of days, or well, and say in CEO agenda that will be probably a couple of days, but ideally a couple of weeks, and let them become friends and talk about business and talk about life and talk about everything that's Camino related or non business related, and really build that relationship there.
That will be quite interesting. I was thinking mostly about bringing Mr. Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and put them together in the Camino and see what can happen out of that. I'm like, for the ones we don't know, today is November 11 or November 9th. I'm like, what will happen if we bring someone like this, into the Camino and what will they experience out of there? It will be something that always fascinates me. People that is so connected. So what will happen if we unplug them and get them into the Camino for a week, two
Well,
weeks, or even one
you
day?
you mentioned one, especially one important word: unplug them. Will we be able to unplug them?
I don't know. That will be my thing. Just try them. Get them out of their phone, sign for everything, and or even sometimes the full unplug is for a lot of people, and that's one of the fights also that sometimes we get in the Camino that people go with the phone or they get a phone call, and like some people they have so many things that cannot unplug. It can be family, it can be a business, it can be a relative, but maybe just if we are able to unplug them just for a short time of the day or just get into the Camino mode, I don't know. That would be a good question. Maybe we need to start tweeting Mr. Elon and invite him to go and walk the Camino with us. Maybe he will say yes.
Who knows? There's
That
no
will be
Camino
quite
to Mars,
interesting.
but otherwise he would do it.
Yeah. Maybe he will do it on a Tesla.
Yeah. Well, that's cheating.
Eh, who knows? Maybe it's his Camino. So if he chooses to do it by that, who am to judge? But for yes, that's a little cheating. And my final question, Peter, what is your next Camino, the one that you have already planned? Because I know that you have a Camino plan for sure. Which one are you going to walk next?
It depends a little bit on the time available. It's not firmly planned yet, but I think I will do the Primitivo once again.
Once again. So that means that this is going to be your third time,
No, second time on the Primitivo.
second time. And why won't they get Primitivo again with so many other caminos to walk? That's one of the things that, a lot of people, when I ask them, there's this kind of pilgrim that does the Camino Frances once and once and once again, and always the Camino Frances. Then you have the pilgrim that does different caminos every time, and then you have pilgrims that, they go back to different ones. So why the Primitivo again instead of trying a new Camino?
Because I really, really like the Primitivo. And then, as I said, it depends also a little bit on the time available.
Hmm.
So I also like to do the San Salvador ones, which is only a week or maybe
Beautiful.
even
Yeah.
less.
Hmm.
Invierno would be a beautiful one. I've read about it a
Hmm.
lot. I've seen a lot of pictures. So there is still a lot of choice from that perspective.
And that's the worst part when you start chatting with all these pilgrim freaks that they start talking about new caminos, and then you discover the Primitivos in Salvador. Then you discover that there's another one that's the Camino Ignaciano, the Camino Batanes, the Camino Interior. There's so many little caminos that is just amazing. And what I always try to encourage people, sometimes the Camino doesn't have to finish in Santiago. You can go for a week, you can go for 3 days.
Yeah, I totally
Sometimes being
agree.
able to unplug is just amazing for a couple of days, and you get your batteries charged for till you have that option of going for a longer time.
Yeah. There's certainly one element of the Camino that I will try to avoid, and that is the last couple of stages of the Frances when I am walking in summer.
Yeah, that's totally for sure. And that's one of the things that that's one lately, all my caminos, they tend to be as far as from Santiago as possible.
I recognize that.
Anyway, Peter, thank you so much for your time. I guess, I hope that everybody gets invited, from the corporate world to listen to this, to go and give it a go and try it and discover the Camino, even if they are far away sometimes. I know it's hard, but the Camino starts from your front door. So maybe you have a Camino in your gate. Maybe there's a Camino waiting for you out there. And once you get hooked, I'm sure they will repeat. So as we always said, buen camino, ultrella.
Buen Camino, and thank you for having me, Jose.
Thank you.